Kennedy Nickerson, and I'm originally from Niantic, Connecticut, and I earned my Master in Public Policy from the Carsey School at the University of New Hampshire in 2017. I'm currently a Vice President of Energy Policy at Capstone, LLC, a Washington, D.C.-based regulatory and policy due diligence firm working with investors and companies to kind of help them better understand the risks and opportunities associated with federal, regional, and state policy. My interest in politics and policy started at a pretty young age. I remember in the early 2000s protesting the Iraq War with my mom and writing George W. Bush a letter asking him to put women's baseball on TV just as much as men's baseball. I was very young. And so I thought kind of all of that made me want to get a psychology degree and to, help people cope with emotions and trauma kind of after the fact. But once I studied psych for 3-ish years and I interned at some clinical psychology settings, I decided that I wanted to get more into trauma prevention. And in my opinion, public policy is a massive piece of that puzzle. The Carsey School and the Masters in Public Policy program aligned with the issues that I really cared about addressing most. And so that was a huge motivating factor into why I chose to pursue my MPP there. Like I said, I cared about politics and policy and helping people from a really young age, and I viewed this opportunity as one where I could, continue pursuing that. For instance, the MPP program offered a research fellowship at the Vulnerable Families Research Program, and that was something that I really cared about, understanding the impact of policy and politics on. And so I remember doing research on the earned income tax credit, for instance, and proposals in the House and Senate in D.C. That would potentially negatively impact that program and the ability for poor places across the country and poor families across the country to access that tax credit, which was extremely beneficial to their well-being. And so I saw programs like that, and I saw the opportunity to get into a master's program that was just starting out and, ideally helping to shape the ultimate content of those programs and give back throughout my career to make sure that it, still offers these competitive type programs. So the two biggest skills I learned at Carsey that I've, directly applied in my career thus far are probably 1, policy analysis, and 2, writing. Both of those skills are very hard to master, but are so critical to being successful in a policy career. I want to say especially in DC. Taking ultra complex legalese text and understanding, and most importantly, I think communicating how it will impact our society is not easy at all. But Carsey, I think, prepared me extremely well for that reality. I think my biggest takeaway from the program is how important state and local politics and policy is. And so I work in DC now, but after getting my master's in public policy, I worked in Boston for a couple of years where I did policy analysis for the state of Massachusetts. I worked in the Senate Committee on Ways and Means, which is the committee in Massachusetts that drafts and proposes the state budget and deliberates that with the other chamber as well as the governor's office. And so through that role from Carsey, I was really able to see the state and local impacts of policy and the influence that state and local policy can have on the actual tangible outcome and people's day-to-day lives. And so despite me moving to DC, the master's program and my experience in Boston really, I think, is a valuable reminder to myself and to the folks that I work with when we talk about these issues that, the federal government can only do so much. And the state governments really do have a meaningful impact on people's day-to-day lives. And the policy there is really also worth understanding and worth looking into to ultimately calculate the actual impacts. And so I think the Carsey program in particular prepared me well to understand that in particular, especially as it prepared me to work in the Massachusetts State House and get firsthand experience into what states can and can't do. So I recently spoke at CERAWeek alongside some industry peers on the role of low-carbon energy solutions and the outlook for those technologies under the Trump administration. I think the MPP really influenced my ability to engage in these high-level policy forums like CERAWeek by providing that kind of overarching political and policy context that really, I think, set the scene for me from the start of my policy career and has continued to be extremely valuable as I progress. I think one thing that kind of goes unnoticed or is maybe undervalued is the impact that politics and policy have on your community. And so through the Master's in Public Policy program at Carsey, I think back often to some of the lessons that I learned specifically with regard to kind of this ultimate, federal policymaking, how that ultimately plays out in the states and local governments, and the really important role that states and local governments play in the implementation of federal policy. And so that has the most tangible impact on each individual in a community, particularly low-income communities, and what they'll see in their utility bill, for instance. And I think that thinking back to the Carsey program in particular, I think that was a really big emphasis throughout the program, is that particularly because we weren't based in DC, we were based in New Hampshire. And I think that gave us a really great window into state policy and local policy and, how what happens at the federal level trickles down to impact those around us in our local communities. I think more than ever, history and the context behind why policies are the way they are is increasingly important, as the kind of status quo in the policy world is shifting due to the Trump administration and the shifting priorities between federal and state and those interesting dynamics and evolving dynamics. And I think that policy context, why policies are written the way that they are, is increasingly important as we understand how to change them in, various ways. So the Washington, D.C. Colloquium at Carsey showed me the huge range of careers I could have once I completed my Master's in Public Policy, which was extremely valuable, I think, particularly for me as I was coming into the program directly out of undergrad. I had no idea at the time, what I wanted to do with my MPP, other than probably work for some branch of the government. But the Colloquium really showed me all of the other options outside of government that you can pursue with an MPP. Obviously, most are government adjacent, but I ultimately did pursue working in government, working at the Massachusetts State House, working at the U.S. Department of Energy, and then ultimately going to these kind of, government adjacent roles where I was and have worked as an advisor to clean energy companies, both in the startup space and major corporations, to help them understand politics and policy and how that could impact their businesses. I would absolutely say that earning my master's degree from the Carsey School has paid off, because in DC particular, an MPP is gold. Most job postings you see don't necessarily require them, but they are absolutely encouraged, and I think will set you apart from the broader pool of applicants. Particularly, I think also the MPP is a growing degree. So to those wondering if the MPP is worth it, I would say it has been a game changer in my career, and I would not be where I am.